So we're going to go to another part of the world. We're going to Australia. And actually, we're not going to Australia. We're going to Macker Island, which is part of Tasmania, which is part of Australia. So Macker Island. And we are just going to see an environmental disaster related to invasive species, but a recovery as well. So it's a bad story that kind of turns into an okay story at the end of it. So Macker Island is an island found off the coast of Australia, pretty small island, and as far as we know, there may have been Polynesians on it at one point, but when colonists from Australia came over in the 1800s, there was no one on the island. And when they came over, kind of similar to Hawaii, their boats had rats on them. It's kind of a thing like it's going to happen. If you're on a boat, you're going to have rats. So they landed on Macker Island, and they unintentionally released rats onto the island. So that's where our story starts, and that started in 1810. This is when settlers first went over to Macker Island. Now this is kind of a downside, right? You're establishing yourself on your island, you have these different food resources, but you're getting rats everywhere. Pretty typical at the time, most big boats and big sailing boats had at least 1 or 2 cats on them. Those cats were used as a method of biological control. Cats are great at catching rats. And so when the settlers started establishing themselves on this island, they brought the rats, but they also brought over cats. And they brought over a couple more cats on subsequent trips, just because the rats were kind of growing out of control. So in this case, the cats are considered a biological control, because they are controlling another species. And instead of using rat poison, they were using an actual organism like our cats. So that's one part of the thing going on Macker Island. Another thing that they did, the colonists did, was they brought over rabbits. So in 1870, 60 years later, there's really not that many mammal species on the island. There's actually no mammals on the island. That's pretty typical of islands, which also means there's not a lot of meat. So the colonists needed a food source, so they thought, okay, you know what, let's bring over rabbits. We can use the rabbits for fur, and we can use them for meat. If you guys know anything about rabbits, there's a saying, they breed like rabbits. Rabbits can produce up to like 30 different rabbit children a year. So they can breed insanely fast. And that's exactly what they did. Now, I will say, the cats were eating them, right? Cats love anything that move. So the cats are eating the rats, the cats are eating the rabbits, but rabbits are just growing out of control because they're rabbits and they breed quickly. Now, the cats have all of these food sources, and so the cats are exploding. They're eating the rats, they're eating the rabbits, they're also eating, if you guys have a cat that you let outside, they're also eating birds. Because cats are growing out of control now. So we've got the rats out of control, we've got the rabbits out of control, we've got the cats out of control, and now they're starting to affect the native species. This is the Macker parrot. It is only found on Macker Island, or I should say, it was only found on Macker Island. It's gone extinct. The cats ate them all. The cats were also eating a lot of other birds and bird nests. A lot of them are in the endangered zone, haven't gone extinct yet. So we'll see. Right? Well, they're all, well, I'll spoil it a little bit. They are recovering now. But at the time, their populations were plummeting. The Macker parrot got the short end of the stick and they went extinct, but all the other bird species were declining. So that was going on. And we're realizing we're having issues, right? We have all of these rabbits, and they're eating tons and tons of vegetation. They're eating the farmers' crops. They're eating local vegetation. And so what's happening is we're actually getting a lot of erosion because there's pretty much a whole bunch of soil around because a lot of the grass has been eaten. So not only are the rabbits eating the crops, but they're also breaking down the soil through erosion, which is making it even harder for farmers to grow their crops. So we're having a lot of issues related to these 3 species. So the Australian government was like, you know what, we need to do something about this rabbit species. And they did. They introduced a flea. And this is a picture of the flea. And they inoculated the flea with a disease. Now, that sounds kind of scary. You're like, great, we're going to introduce just another organism. we got smarter. So this is 1978. We're getting smarter with our choices. This flea only attacks rabbits, and the disease we introduce only affects rabbits. So even if this rabbit dies, and say a cat eats that rabbit, that disease actually wouldn't affect the cat. So here's an example of a biological control, this flea, that we did our research on. We knew it would only attack rabbits. We knew the disease would only affect rabbits. It was very, very specific. And when things are very specific, that's when they have the likelihood of being successful. And it was. This flea killed like 95% of all rabbits on the island. That other 5%, well, they survived. They just happened to be immune. The flea probably bit them, but they just had a natural immunity to the disease that they inoculated it with. Similar to humans, right? Not everyone gets the flu because some people are just naturally immune to the flu. So we've got that going on. We killed most of the rabbits. The population or the ecosystem was kind of stabilizing a little bit. However, then the cats started going out of control. They didn't have this food source. They didn't have these rabbits anymore. They had very few rabbits. So they started eating the local populations even more. And so we're seeing a second plummet in bird species. Because the cats were still in high abundance. We hadn't tried killing the cats yet. So they needed to eat something. So they started eating a lot more of the local species. And so we saw a second crash in the local ecosystem. Yes, getting rid of the rabbits helped the farmers, but local species were taking the brunt of it. So, in 1985 to 2000, it took 15 years of trapping efforts to get rid of every single cat left on the island. 15 years of trapping. So here's the thing. You're like, all right, well, that's cool. Who's paying for that, right? This is millions of dollars worth of traps, worth of people setting them out, worth of people collecting the cats. That's taxpayers. Well, not us, not you and me, but Australian taxpayers. They're the ones paying for the problem that happened 150 years ago that has been growing out of control. But I will say it was successful. They were able to get every single cat off the island. But it took 15 years. Well, let's go back to these rabbits. I said 5% of them lived. 5% of them that were immune to those fleas and that disease. 5% of them that no longer have a predator because there's no cats on the island anymore. So the rabbits ended up reproducing and growing in numbers past the original time they were at. So now you have this huge population of rabbits that have grown out of control, that are immune to this disease and have no predators. So we did all sorts of things. Over the period of 7 years, 2007 to 2014, we trapped them in cages. We dropped poison, literally from helicopters, and we brought dogs. Now, I will say dogs weren't just released. Dogs were trained to catch any remaining rabbits. So for a long time, they were using poison and using traps to get the rabbits. And then at the very end, they brought in the dogs. The dogs found 7 rabbits. And the rabbits were exterminated. And as far as we know, as of 2014, they said there are no more rabbits on the island. So now we have gotten rid of the cats. We have gotten rid of the rabbits. We have already started seeing in the past, 4 or 5 years, seabird populations are growing again. The Macker parrot is out of the picture, but all the other ones are at least rebounding. Now we still have this original rat problem, and it's probably just going to have to stay that way, otherwise using rat poison. But probably aren't going to bring anything else anymore. Right? No more cats, no more rabbits, no more dogs. We're trying to get this ecosystem back to what it used to be. But just looking at this slide, look at this crazy situation that started with one species. And it ended up in the extinction of another, the crashing of others, no more plantations, no more colonists. No one lives on Macker Island anymore other than a handful of scientists. Because it's a World Heritage Site. We want to preserve the biodiversity that exists on that island, and that was ruined by humans bringing over a species. So, when it comes to handling invasive species, it has to be thought out. If you're going to bring over a species, a biological control, you really have to think, what will it actually eat? Will it be successful, and will it be specific? If the answer is no to any of those, it's going to fail, and you're going to have explosions like we saw on Macker Island. So invasive species start as a non-native species. That rat wasn't found on Macker Island. That mongoose wasn't found on Hawaii. And they're brought over. And it might have been on purpose, might have been on accident. Sometimes they don't go invasive. Sometimes they just sit there and they are part of the ecosystem and get assimilated into the ecosystem. But if they are long-lived, if they reproduce a lot, if they eat a lot, then chances are they might go invasive, and they become invasive by negatively impacting their ecosystem. And usually in the long run, that negatively impacts humans. So by reducing the amount of invasive species, we can really make big positive impacts onto our ecosystem.